Hello, I'm Rafaela Lindeberg and I'm a reporter with Bloomberg News in Stockholm. I'm thrilled to be joined by Volvo Cars Chief Financial Officer Björn Annwall for a discussion on sustainability. Björn, thank you for being here for our virtual Sustainable Business Summit. This session is about Volvo Cars and your company's path towards a more sustainable future, and not the least the financial case for it. And I've heard from your communications team that you are quite passionate about this subject, and according to some sources, you actually are keeping a copy of the IPCC report on your desk at the office. Is that true?
It's some part of it I do, but I also keep, and I think that's more important, a copy of our sustainability strategy in my little notebook that I carry everywhere. Because in the end, it's good with the IPCC report, but what we do is more important.
And given that transport is said to account for 10% of global carbon emissions, it would be great if you could perhaps start with a quick run through of how you think the auto industry is part of the climate crisis.
No, I think, as you said, 10-15% of the greenhouse emissions in the world comes from road transportation. So clearly the automotive industry is a big part of the problem and has to very quickly become part of the solution. And we need to get to climate neutral, fossil-free and greenhouse emission neutral net zero by 2050. And in order to get there, clearly we need to get out of combustion engines. And that has to happen quite quick. And that's exactly Volvo's stance into this. We want Volvo to be a fast transformer and be a catalyst for the whole sector to change into a sustainable future. So Volvo's targets is to be climate neutral by 2040. And the only way to get there is to get out of the internal combustion engine by 2030 and start the transition into full electric cars already now. And that's our strategy.
Yeah, about these targets you set up, that is quite an ambition given that your sales of fully electric cars is still below 5%, right? Based on Q3 sales.
It is a challenge, and it's a marathon, and our plan and strategy is very, very clear. We said from the beginning that what stops the world from going fully electric, there are three major hurdles that we need to, as a society, to get over. First of all is the cost of fully electric cars. It needs to be a technology that's affordable for more people. Secondly, in order to rely on fully electric cars, there has to be a fast charging network so that you can also drive long distances when you need to. And thirdly, it always takes time to change consumer behaviors. So those are the three hurdles. And our strategy was then, okay, let's do this in two steps. Steps one, let's do plug-in hybrids, which are then part-time electric cars. That solves those problems because the cost is lower. You're not relying on the fast charging network. And on top of that, you get the consumers to get some time to learn this new technology. How do you charge? Where do you charge? And how does that work? So our strategy has been to do that. And we have plug-in hybrid technology in all our cars. And it's now constitute a third of our sales globally. So a third of all the Volvo sales today is with Accord, but the most of them are then part-time electric cars, as I call them. Now, from the point we are today up until the future, now the focus is on fully electric cars. And we have two fully electric cars in the market, the XC40 BEV and the C40. And the capacity for them are right now, from a production point of view, quite limited, but the demand is really high. And we are now quickly ramping up our production. So the production for those two cars goes from 15,000 a year right now up to 150,000 a year after summer. So now we get the supply, and therefore we can also increase the sales quite rapidly. And then we are launching an additional full electric car every year in the coming years. And Volvo, as you know, is a company which has a quite limited product lineup with 7 cars. So in a very short period of time, we can shift the epicenter of our sales from plug-in hybrid today into fully electric cars in a few years. And more than half of our sales should be fully electric by 2025.
Can you tell us how your targets measure and compare to other traditional car makers? How does this approach differ to competition?
In general, I would say that you see more and more traditional automakers coming out with clearer and clearer strategies when it comes to electrification. And I think what differs in the rhetoric now is more the timing. I think everybody believes that we see a need to go to full electric future. And then the question is, how quickly can we do it, and how quickly are different companies aspiring to do it? And we have the fastest plan in the industry among the traditional players to go fully electric. And I think we can have that because Volvo is it's a premium brand. It's a relatively small brand, and we also have a consumer group that cares a lot about safety in general. Planetary safety and sustainability is very important for the Volvo consumers. So they expect Volvo to take the same lead in the race to net zero when it comes to carbon emission, as we've always been in the lead in the race to net zero of fatalities and injuries in road traffic. And so it fits very well with the Volvo consumer, and that's why I believe we have an obligation and a big opportunity to do this quicker than anybody else. And I think that's a question I got a lot, is this really profitable? And in my mind, being on the right side of progress is always profitable. And this is where the industry needs to go faster and more determined. Then competition is typically a good thing. If you want to grow, you should focus on the growing part of the market. And the fully electric premium car market is the fastest growing part of our market. So that's our focus.
Well, we're talking enormous investments. And how are you going about this to reach that kind of capacity we are talking about?
No, it's a good question. It is an enormous investment, but you should also remember that automotive companies make enormous investments every year in development and capex in tooling and setting up factories. So it's not a question of and, it's mostly a question of instead of. So now we are stopping the development on internal combustion engines. We are not doing any investment into our factories when it comes to the production of combustion cars. And instead, we devote all of those resources into a fully electric future. So that's the main story. Then there are some things we do on top. So we have now taken the full consequences of not seeing a future for the internal combustion engine and fully spun off our internal combustion engine factories, I should say. We had two of them, and then we're now spun off, so we don't manage that any longer. So we do less of that, and instead we invest our efforts and our money into building up our competence when it comes to battery cell chemistry, the electric motor, the whole battery management system, and all the things that you need to make the electric propulsion system really efficient for the future. So yes, there are some extra investment, but most of this is stop doing that and instead doing this.
We actually got a question from the audience asking, this is going to be a highly competitive market. How is Volvo going to be more competitive on a hot market?
It's a good question, and I think it comes down to focus. And that's where Volvo has made the choice that we don't believe in investing into the old internal combustion engines and the platforms that has an internal combustion engine. That all our efforts and all our technology development now goes into a full electric core compute architecture platform. And that's of course a risk. There is a risk that some consumers feel that the internal combustion engines needs to be there longer. So we take a risk, but instead we focus on making what we see as the future of the automotive industry really good and really competitive. So we need to focus, and I think we are focusing more than our traditional competitors. And then, of course, we have a set of inspiring and exciting new competitors in the automotive industry who's only doing one thing, and that is focusing on the fully electric future. So they have a bit of an advantage of being 100% focused, but on the other hand, we have a big advantage of all the things we learned from the past. How do you put together a car in a quality assured way? How do you make a car really safe? When cars break down or get scratches, because also fully electric cars will get scratches, unfortunately, where can they be serviced from a good retail network? So we have some assets that we then put together with this determined focus, and that combination of taking the strength from the past and a determined focus for the future, that's Volvo's recipe for being successful here.
Obviously, you were present at COP26 on Transportation Day. We have this big declaration from the countries and from manufacturers to phase out fossil fuel vehicles. And it became quite a big part of the narrative around those days in Glasgow. who signed up and who didn't, and why didn't they. How would you summarize this and the turnout from the meeting?
So one of the things I think was good in Glasgow compared to maybe earlier conventions like this is that it was much more focused on actions here and now. So I think it's starting to be more about how and less about if and when. That was a good part of it. And when it comes to the auto industry, I mean, this declaration that the industry aims to get out of combustion engines, I think we said in most countries in 25 and in 2035 and globally 2040. Of course, that's far out in time, and we as Volvo have a much more ambitious strategy to get completely out of it in 2030. But I do believe it's good that industry players and authorities together have a discussion on when is it sensible to have the end of ICE, because at some point we need to end ICE if we want to get to a net zero by 2050. That's it's simple climate science.
Mm. And the fact that the European Union wants member states to stop selling combustion cars no later than in 2035, how important is that in order to really achieve this revolution?
Let's see, but I do believe you cannot achieve all the changes we want just with incentives. Sometimes we compare it with car safety. I mean, when people realize that the only way to save people in cars is actually a 3-point seat belt, it wasn't the government said that you get, €1,000 rebate if you buy a car with a safety belt. They basically said it's mandatory that cars have safety belt. And that drove the adoption very quickly. For certain features, that is a very good signal to drive an industry to make it mandatory. And I think having a requirement that there is no tailpipe emission wouldn't be a strange mandate from a government to put in. And I think the key here is not exactly when you put the date. I think it's key that you put a date, because then this becomes inevitable, and who wants to buy a car or invest into a technology it's not going to be fruitful in the long run. So I think that could accelerate the transition. Mm. But our strategy is set regardless.
Yeah. Thomas Ingenlath, the CEO of Polestar, the EV manufacturer that you're still a very large owner in, he was very critical of the Glasgow Declaration. He said that targets were extremely unambitious and that traditional car makers are moving as slowly as they can in making the switch. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can't talk on behalf of the whole industry, but clearly the industry need to move quickly if we are to reach net zero for the society at large by 2050. We need to get out of combustion engines, and I agree that it's not going extremely quickly right now, but I look very much with positive eyes on the development, because I see the demand from consumers is there. The technology that enables the shift to full electric is definitely there, and you see the legislators want it as well. So as with all changes, first they happen much slower than you hope, but then when they happen, it goes very quickly. And I think we are at that inflection point now. So I do believe that regardless of the lack of some of the declarations in Glasgow, the market and the consumers will drive this change very rapidly, at least in Europe.
Mm. At the summit, you also announced that you have introduced an internal carbon price of 1,000 Swedish SEK. That's about $110 for every ton of carbon emitted across the value chain. Can you explain how and why this new system?
No, it's as I said, we want to be climate neutral 2040, and then there's a million things we need to get right, and then every decision we have an impact on our CO2 footprint. And it's been a bit of a tendency that you have a sustainability team who's very good at counting the grams for any decisions, and then you have the, call it normal management, where you take the big investment decisions, and then you look at the regular things of profitability and what consumer thinks and impact on brand and so forth. And of course, that can't be two different things. It has to be one thing, because it's in those decisions that you build the sustainability for the future. And a lot of people speaks in US dollars rather than in grams CO2. And by saying that a CO2 abatement of 1 gram is worth those around $100. It's a way to put a clear cost on the CO2 footprint that you create with your decisions. And conceptually, it's basically that by 2040, we do see that there is a residual here. We can take away a lot, but there will be something left there. And then we need to have real abatement. Not that we buy some credits from somebody else, but you need, if it's carbon capturing or some kind of real abatement. And the assessment right now is that the cost of that abatement will be around those $100 per ton. So let's already now start to calculate for that cost that we inevitably will end up with. And I do believe that legislation will put taxes on it well before we get there. So it's good to start planning for it already now.
But $110, isn't that quite a high price at this point? What's the motivation for it?
Nobody knows. Yeah, nobody knows what the cost of carbon capture or abatement will be in 2040. And there are different people make different estimates of it. But I do believe the key thing is to put a number. And if it's 110 or 150 or 50, that's not the key point. The key point is that you get a dollar value for it. You get the discussions of sustainability in the same context, in the same room as you make your major economic decisions. And that's what we are achieving with this.
And speaking of costs, from the consumer perspective, in order to succeed with these ambitious targets, I assume it's to a large extent also a matter of pricing. And so when do you expect the cost of producing an EV will reach parity with combustion engine cars?
So you're right. I mean, the car industry will become fully electric. And of course, consumer will not start to pay much more for cars just because they're electric. And likewise, yes, today some governments are subsidizing fully electric cars to some degree, but eventually when the full market is electric, they cannot subsidize the market. So you need to reach a cost level parity for BEVs with ICE. And in our plan now, in the development roadmap we will reach this full cost parity of BEVs with today's ICE by mid-decade, around 25. And the things that needs to get fixed is basically the battery cell cost, the whole electric propulsion efficiency. That's the key thing that we're working with in order to create that parity. And we have a clear plan on how we're going to achieve it. And up until that point, consumers are to some degree willing to pay a bit of a premium, and there are a bit of subsidies. So for us, this transition to full electric future is a profitable transition. Yes, it might have slightly lower margins in the first generation of the technology, but to grab market share in the growing part of the market and then get up the learning curve on technology and take out cost is the right way to go if you want to be successful in the long run. And that's our strategy.
We've got another question from the audience. Have you thought about what tools, applications you can use to bring greater transparency to how you measure climate impact?
This is a question we're working with a lot. So the most basic tools we have is very simple. It's just to create a transparency in a waterfall measure in terms of here is the full over the life cycle CO2 impact of per car. What comes from tailpipe, what comes from our operations, what comes from the supply chain, and then basically all the initiatives and changes we're driving in the next, say, 5 years, what impact will they have on CO2? And we make a pretty simple waterfall that just clarifies how this will go down, and creating that transparency and everybody understanding that waterfall and keep improving that waterfall. That's the first level. And then the second level is then to make sure that all the controllers in our company, who is very good at understanding what things are costs in dollars, but they also get the basics and understanding the kind of full value chain effect of CO2 and start to put that into the exact same calculations. I don't want that to be done in a completely different system. I want all the controllers at Volvo to be able to speak CO2 as well as they speak dollars.
And moving over to collaborations at Volvo Cars, you're collaborating with SSAB to develop fossil-free steel, and you also have a joint venture with battery supplier Northvolt to produce batteries using renewable energy. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, it's maybe I take a step back and say the carbon effect footprint of a car today, or Volvo today, basically, it's 60% comes from tailpipe emission, maybe 30% comes from the supply chain, and less than 10% from our own operations. And of course, we need to fix all of that. So first step, make the car fully electric, then you take away the 60%, but you actually create a new problem, because then you need to deliver and build batteries. And those batteries, first of all, they require energy just to build them, and they require a lot of materials that, of course, consume CO2. So you need to develop those batteries in a very efficient way, and that's exactly what we're doing with Northvolt, to develop, first of all, put the factory in a place with fossil-free energy, and also to make sure you build in a high degree of circularity in the material you use, both how you source it, but also how you put it together so you can reuse it once a battery is old, and it can go back to be material in a new battery. So that's exactly what we're working with together with Northvolt. And then, yes, so then we solve batteries, but then a car is still a big piece of material. You have a lot of steel and aluminum and plastics in it, and that requires a lot of CO2 to get produced. And especially steel has a quite big carbon footprint. And what we're working with SSAB to do is to invest in technologies, totally new types of technologies for developing steels, with a much lower CO2 footprint. And that technology we need to get at scale in order for us to get to this climate neutral situation by 2040. But we can't solve all of this by ourselves, but we can partner up with great and progressive suppliers and find the ways to get there. And that's the idea.
Collaboration is key. A final question. What has your own IPO meant for making sustainability targets reachable?
A lot. I think, first of all, going from having one owner to having 200,000 owners overnight is, of course, inspiring and interesting. And the whole strategy that Volvo was IPO'd on is a strategy of, reaching a fully electric future and reaching our sustainability targets. So I think it was a big vote of confidence for the strategy that we have, and also a big obligation for Volvo now to continue to report on the progress on what is the CO2 footprint per car. We're going to report that every quarter. So we got capital, and we also got a big vote of confidence that our fastest transformer strategy is something that investors believe in, and now really count on us delivering on. And I think that makes us even more determined to continue the journey we're on. And basically, we have no choice. If we don't, I think we're going to be really hurt on the stock market.